The greatest mistake many people make in love is not choosing the wrong person. It is choosing a person before they have learned how to stand being alone with themselves. Most people do not enter relationships because they are ready to love. They enter because they are tired of loneliness, tired of silence, tired of their own mind, tired of carrying themselves without distraction, and so they call it love, when in reality it is escape. This is why so many relationships begin with intensity with confusion. This is why people promise forever, when they have not yet learned how to survive one quiet evening alone. And this is why staying single, when understood correctly, is not a failure, not a delay, not a punishment, but one of the most powerful and transformative seasons a human being can ever go through. Because the person who learns to be whole alone enters love differently from the person who enters love empty. One enters to give, the other enters to be saved. One enters with peace, the other enters with hunger. One enters with self-respect, the other enters with fear. And fear, no matter how romantic it sounds in the beginning, always becomes suffering in the end. There is a kind of social pressure that few people are honest about. It begins early. You are taught, directly and indirectly, that your life is incomplete until someone chooses you. That being alone too long is suspicious. That if everyone around you is finding someone and you are still by yourself, something must be wrong. And because this pressure is repeated so often, it starts to shape the way people see themselves. They stop asking whether a relationship is right, and start asking whether being single means they are falling behind. They stop protecting their peace and start bargaining with it. They stop honoring their standards and start negotiating with loneliness. This is how people end up in relationships that drain them, confuse them, diminish them, and quietly disconnect them from themselves. Not because they were weak, but because they were afraid. Afraid that being alone meant being unwanted. Afraid that solitude meant failure. Afraid that waiting meant missing out. But the Stoics would tell you that the thing you fear is often the very thing that can set you free. If only you stop resisting it long enough to understand what it is trying to teach you. To most people, being single looks like absence. The absence of romance, of companionship, of intimacy, of daily validation. But that is only how it looks from the outside. From the inside, if lived properly, singleness is not absence at all. It is space. Space to hear yourself clearly. Space to observe your patterns. Space to understand what you actually want instead of what your loneliness is willing to tolerate. Space to discover whether your desires are truly yours or whether they were inherited from culture, pressure, fantasy, and fear. A person who is never alone long enough to know themselves will always mistake chemistry for compatibility, attention for care, and attachment for love. They will always be vulnerable to anyone who offers temporary relief from inner emptiness. And this is dangerous, because when you are starving emotionally, you stop asking whether the food is poison. Marcus Aurelius spent much of his life surrounded by people, yet the deepest part of his strength came not from company, but from the private discipline of returning to himself. He understood that a person who cannot govern their inner world will be ruled by outer circumstances. And nowhere is this more true than in relationships. If your peace depends on whether someone texts you back, whether someone reassures you, whether someone chooses you again and again in the exact way your fear demands, then you are not in love. You are in bondage. You have handed your emotional stability to another person and asked them to manage what you were meant to master. This does not create intimacy. It creates dependency. And dependency is often mistaken for deep love by those who have never experienced the difference. Staying single gives you something most relationships, especially rushed or unhealthy ones, quietly take away from you in the early stages. It gives you perspective. When nobody is constantly affirming you, distracting you, soothing you, or triggering you, you begin to see your own mind more clearly. You begin to notice where your restlessness comes from. You begin to notice how often you seek approval, how quickly you crave attention, how deeply you fear being forgotten. And while this can feel uncomfortable, even painful, it is one of the greatest gifts life can offer you, because what is revealed can finally be healed. Most people do not heal in relationships because they are too busy reacting, too busy interpreting messages, reading signals, negotiating boundaries, suppressing needs, proving worth, or chasing reassurance. But in solitude there is no one to perform for, no one to impress, no one to blame. There is just you and the truth. That truth is often hard to face. It may show you that you do not actually miss a specific person, only the feeling of being wanted. It may show you that what you called love was often fear of abandonment, dressed in beautiful language. It may show you that the people you chased were never right for you, only familiar to your wounds. This is why many people avoid staying single for too long. Not because solitude is unbearable, but because honesty is. A quiet room has a way of exposing what noise keeps hidden. When no one is there to distract you from yourself, you finally meet the parts of yourself you have been outrunning. Your insecurity, your dependency, your unprocessed grief, your hidden anger, your need to be chosen because you have not yet fully chosen yourself. And though this meeting can feel brutal, it is sacred. It is the beginning of real adulthood. Epictetus taught that freedom begins the moment you stop demanding from the world what the world was never meant to guarantee. Apply that to relationships and something profound becomes clear. No person can guarantee that they will always understand you perfectly, love you consistently, soothe you on command, or stay forever in the exact form you prefer. Human beings are changing creatures. Their moods shift, their desires change, their limitations appear, their fears leak into the spaces where promises once lived. If your peace depends on another person's constancy, you have built your home on moving water. But if you learn, while single, to root your peace in your own discipline, your own values, your own ability to stand firm when lonely, then when love finally comes, it enhances your life without becoming the foundation beneath it. You enjoy it without worshipping it. You appreciate it without clinging to it. You love without losing yourself. There is also a brutal truth that many people only learn after years of heartbreak. A relationship does not make you more valuable. It only reveals how much of your value you have already recognized. If you enter a relationship secretly believing you are not enough, then every conflict will feel like confirmation, every distance will feel like rejection, every silence will feel like danger. You will ask the other person to constantly repair a wound they did not create and cannot permanently heal. This is why staying single can be the best thing you can do. Because it gives you time to build self-worth that does not depend on being admired, desired, pursued, or chosen. It gives you time to become the kind of person who knows their own value so deeply that even if love leaves, dignity remains. Seneca often pointed toward the importance of preparing the mind before difficulty arrives. He believed that the wise person does not wait for a crisis to build strength. They build it beforehand. Singleness, when approached with stoic seriousness, is exactly this kind of preparation. It is emotional training. It is spiritual conditioning. It is the season where you learn whether you can create order inside yourself without relying on romance as your medicine. You learn how to structure your life, manage your thoughts, direct your energy, and create meaning with no one applauding you for it. And that matters. Because if you cannot build a meaningful life alone, you will eventually use a relationship to avoid building one at all. Look carefully at many relationships, and you will see something sad beneath the surface. Two unfinished people trying to use each other as insulation against themselves. They are not joining out of wholeness. They are merging out of fear. They need constant contact, not because their bond is deep, but because their silence is shallow. They cannot bear distance, because distance forces them back into contact with their own unexamined lives. So they stay entangled. They call it loyalty. They call it passion. They call it destiny. But often it is simply mutual avoidance. And the tragedy is that neither person grows. Their wounds dance together. Their insecurities negotiate temporary peace. Their loneliness goes quiet for a while. But nothing truly changes. The structure remains weak because it was built by two people who had not yet learned how to stand alone. Aristotle believed that the good life was not found in chasing pleasure, but in cultivating excellence of character. This is a forgotten idea in modern romance. People ask whether someone excites them, understands them, attracts them, entertains them, but they rarely ask the deeper question. Who am I becoming around this person? More disciplined or less? More honest or more performative? More peaceful or more reactive? More self-respecting or more desperate? Staying single gives you the ability to answer that question without confusion. Gives you time to become someone whose life is not built around reaction, Someone whose standards come from principle, not loneliness. Someone who can recognize when attraction is pulling them toward chaos instead of character. And let us be honest about loneliness, because this is where many people lose the argument. Loneliness hurts, it really does. There are nights when silence feels heavy. There are weekends when the absence of someone beside you feels like a quiet accusation. There are moments when seeing others in love stirs a kind of sadness you cannot easily explain. Stoicism does not ask you to pretend this does not exist. It asks you to see it clearly without becoming its servant. Loneliness is not always a sign that something is wrong. Sometimes it is the pain of detox, the pain of no longer using people to sedate yourself, the pain of learning to live without constant emotional sugar. And like all detox, it can feel worse before it feels better. But on the other side is something most people never reach. A life that is not desperate, a heart that is not bargaining, a mind that is not easily manipulated by affection. This is another reason staying single can be one of the best things you ever do. It makes you harder to deceive. Once you learn how to live without constant romantic validation, people can no longer control you with small doses of attention. They cannot hook you with inconsistency. They cannot make you abandon your standards because they know exactly when to come close and when to pull away. The person who is afraid of being alone is easy to manipulate. They will tolerate confusion to avoid emptiness. They will accept disrespect to avoid starting over. They will stay too long because the familiar pain of a bad relationship feels safer than the unfamiliar silence of an empty room. But the person who has mastered singleness, who has eaten alone, healed alone, rebuilt alone, cried alone, prayed alone, and still remained whole, that person becomes almost impossible to control. They do not need what others are offering badly enough to betray themselves for it. There is a quieter benefit too, one that many overlook. When you stay single long enough, your vision sharpens. You stop being impressed by surface-level charm. You stop mistaking intensity for depth. You stop giving special meaning to every spark. You begin to understand that just because someone awakens emotion in you does not mean they deserve access to you. This is wisdom. This is maturity. This is what happens when time alone is not wasted but used to refine your judgment. And refined judgment is one of the most attractive and protective qualities a human being can possess. The modern world tells you to fear missing out. Stoicism teaches you to fear wasting your life on what does not matter. These are very different fears. One pushes you into hasty choices. The other pulls you toward careful living. Most people rush into relationships because they fear being left behind. Very few pause long enough to ask whether the relationship they are entering is worthy of the life they are giving to it. Because that is what every relationship costs in the end. Life, time, attention, emotion, energy, your days, your mind, your nervous system, your peace. You are not just choosing a person. You are choosing the atmosphere in which your soul will live. And if that atmosphere is full of anxiety, dishonesty, emotional instability, and endless uncertainty, then your spirit will slowly adapt to dysfunction and call it normal. Staying single protects you from building your life inside the wrong weather. And there is something deeply powerful about becoming the kind of person who is no longer available for cheap connection. Not because you are cold, not because you are cynical, but because you have finally understood the cost of false intimacy. You have finally understood that some people do not enter your life to love you. They enter to consume your attention, borrow your energy, ease their own loneliness, and leave you more confused than they found you. If you have never learned how to be content single, you will keep mistaking these people for opportunities. But once you have built a real life alone, you stop asking, "Can this person fill my emptiness?" and start asking, "Can this person respect my peace?" That single shift changes everything. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself again and again that the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. Think about what that means in love. If your days are filled with anxiety over mixed signals, obsessive analysis of messages, fear of abandonment, and the emotional instability of someone who does not know what they want, then your inner life begins to absorb that color. Your soul takes on the shape of confusion. But if your days are filled with discipline, reflection, meaningful work, solitude, deep friendship, health, and self-respect, then your soul takes on that color instead. This is why singleness is not empty when lived correctly. It is formative. It is coloring your inner world. It is shaping the emotional atmosphere from which all future love will be chosen. Some of the strongest people you will ever meet are not people who found perfect partners early and lived untouched by heartbreak. They are people who learned, through solitude, not to collapse in their own company. They learned how to carry evenings that felt heavy. They learned how to survive birthdays, holidays, weddings, and quiet Sundays without turning desperation into decisions. They learned how to let the ache move through them without obeying it. They learned that desire is not command, that wanting love does not mean accepting anything in its place, that being alone is painful sometimes, yes, but being deeply entangled with the wrong person is a pain that can deform your character if you live in it too long. This is another Stoic lesson hidden inside singleness. Pain is not always your enemy. Sometimes pain is the price of alignment. Sometimes the discomfort you feel while single is not a sign that you are on the wrong path, but proof that you are no longer betraying yourself just to stay emotionally occupied. There is pain in waiting, but there's also pain in settling. There is pain in solitude, but there is also pain in self-abandonment. The wise person does not choose the path with no pain. They choose the pain that leads somewhere worthy. And very often, the pain of staying single with dignity leads to a far better life than the comfort of entering love out of weakness. What changes most during a healthy season of singleness is not your relationship status. It is your identity. You stop seeing yourself as someone waiting to be completed and start seeing yourself as someone building a life worth sharing. You stop making romance the center of your existence and start making character the center. You begin to ask better questions. But what kind of life am I creating? Not why am I still alone? But am I becoming someone I respect? Not when will my person come? But if they came now, would I even be ready to love them without burdening them with my unfinished war? These are adult questions, Stoic questions. Questions that move you from fantasy into formation. And here is the paradox nobody tells you. The less you need a relationship, the more capable you become of having a healthy one. Because when love is no longer your escape, it can become your expression. When you no longer need someone to rescue you from yourself, you can meet them honestly. You can choose more slowly. You can observe more clearly. You can leave when something is wrong without feeling like you are losing your entire world. You can love deeply without begging. You can care without clinging. You can remain tender without becoming weak. This is not emotional distance. It is emotional discipline. It is the difference between a person who is drowning and grabbing onto anyone nearby, and a person who knows how to swim and therefore chooses carefully who they travel beside. Epictetus would ask you a very simple but devastating question. What is in your control and what is not? You cannot control who comes into your life at the right time. You cannot control when someone becomes ready for love. You cannot control whether another person's heart is mature, honest, and stable. But you can control whether you betray your standards out of loneliness. You can control whether you use this season to become stronger or spend it resenting what is not yet here. You can control whether your single years become a waiting room or a workshop. And that distinction changes your life. The person who sees singleness as a waiting room grows bitter. The person who sees it as a workshop grows formidable. So if you are single right now, do not waste this season by calling it empty. Do not insult this time by treating it like a problem to solve as quickly as possible. This season may be doing for you what no relationship ever could. It may be showing you where you are weak so that you can become strong. It may be detoxing you from attention addiction. It may be rebuilding your standards. It may be forcing you to discover whether your life has meaning beyond being chosen. It may be teaching you how to sit in silence without inventing chaos just to feel alive. It may be preparing your heart for a kind of love that only disciplined solitude can recognize. Because in the end, the best reason to stay single for a while is not to prove that you do not need anyone. That is just ego in another costume. The best reason is to become someone who no longer confuses need with love. Someone who can welcome love without worshipping it. Someone who can lose love without losing themselves. Someone who can stand so firmly in their own values, peace and self-respect that if partnership comes, it becomes a gift, not a lifeline. That is Stoic love. Not cold, not detached, but free, clean, grounded, honest, strong enough to enjoy closeness without collapsing into dependence. One day, if you use this season well, you will look back and realize that staying single was not the period when life was on hold. It was the period when your soul was being built. It was the period when your standards were sharpened, your wounds exposed, your peace protected, your identity clarified. It was the period when you stopped chasing and started becoming. And that, more than romance, more than attention, more than temporary comfort, is what changed the course of a life. If this spoke to something deep in you, subscribe for more Stoic wisdom that helps you build strength where most people only seek comfort.